This is the dumbest idea in the history of dumb ideas.
It's like they literally just handed Republicans $1 billion hammer.
This is not a midterm strategy. It's a hostage video with balloons.
We've got a little bit of a communist problem. You have a gigantic monarchist problem. It's Political Rehab, where PTI meets The Daily Show this week. Trump cashes in while his investors crash out. Republicans' risky gambit in Texas. More firings ahead. A culture war hot button gets the SCOTUS treatment. And a frightening warning from Clarence Thomas. Also, our weekly look at the battlefield unpacks a sneakily good week for the GOP. And some doses of hope, a real one and a snarky one. Let's get straight to this week's rundown. Donald Trump's financial disclosure released this week shows that he personally made more than $2 billion in his first year back in office, nearly $1.4 billion of it from his crypto ventures with his sons. Meanwhile, the investors who bought into those same crypto projects are out roughly the same amount. Matt, Trump's team is calling this just smart investing conducted by outside managers. You buy that, right?
Look, Trump didn't drain the swamp. He franchised it. Every part of Trump's political identity right now has a revenue stream attached to it. Yeah, maybe he's just a really good investor, or maybe the crypto, the watches, the licensing, the Mar-a-Lago foreign deals are all just one big money-making scheme. I think this is why we see all the chaos in Washington right now. It's just a distraction from the money. It's three-card Monte politics. Keep your eyes on this chaos because the cash is moving under the table. But here's why it all matters. Trump made a promise to the American people. Elect me and I will lower inflation, bring down gas prices, and usher in a golden age of America. But for too many Americans, it just simply hasn't happened. Many Americans see a president who is profiting off the presidency while everyone else struggles.
Trump said about his self-dealing, quote, "I found out that nobody cared and I'm allowed to." Both of those are false, right? He is not allowed to. What he's allowed to do is get away with it because the Supreme Court handed him total criminal immunity. And I think, as you point out, Matt, people do care. Corruption is an increasingly salient message for voters. And it's part of what you're seeing in outpourings of support for outsider candidates that are happening in Democratic primaries. It's about being an outsider, being a fighter, being someone who is going to stand up to a system that people see as fundamentally broken. Trump has embodied all of that. Still, as much as people do seem to be caring, it is a very concerning sign for democracy and for the system when the victim isn't even struggling anymore. You're not seeing pushback from Republicans in Congress anymore. That is just bad.
It wasn't that long ago that we attacked Pelosi and other Democrats who we said were profiting off of being in office. And now we don't seem to care when it's Donald Trump. But I have some good news. Republicans are going to hold the first ever midterm convention rally in Dallas, September 9th through 10th. It's a truly historic event, a rally like none other. Reporters are already framing the event as an effort to energize the base over concerns on the approval in the economy. The Guardian also notes that the RNC chair has called this Trumpapalooza. Matt, good idea or bad idea?
It's a brilliant idea. This is fantastic. Let's look at some footage from the current Trumpapalooza going on in D.C. right now.
It's a huge space, and it's just going to get more and more crowded as the week goes on.
Not only do we have a lot of people here, we have people that you want to have here, like Stacey Garrity. That woman's going to be next governor of Pennsylvania.
This is fantastic. There's been so much footage floating around the internet. Anyone out there can find it themselves of just how empty it's been at the current Trumpapalooza. Look, I don't understand why any other Republican besides Trump, including his political director, James Blair, thinks this is a good idea with a currently tied Senate race going on in Texas for Trump to become the main selling point here. Isn't the last thing that you want to do as a Republican strategist to remind people that Ken Paxton is tied to Trump? Don't you want to put the focus on Tallarico? It's great. As a Republican campaign strategist, you love this, huh?
This is the dumbest idea in the history of dumb ideas. We're going to take a president whose polling numbers are in the toilet and make him the closing argument. We have a Congress that has done nothing, completely shit the bed so far this year. What are we going to do this week? Card tricks? We don't have anything to talk about. This is not a midterm strategy. It's a hostage video with balloons.
In all seriousness, is this really Republicans' only move to try to animate the base? Could this actually help them to get Trump out on the trail more?
I think this is more about trying to define the alternative. We have nothing to talk about right now. We have no legislative accomplishments despite holding the House and the Senate. We have a Republican president. We got a conservative court, yet we can't get anything done. Our only strategy, our only move right now is to say Democrats are socialist, and if you vote them, they're going to destroy America. The only people watching this is going to be the base, and you're hoping to energize them and really spread the lies that we're going to win so that when we lose, you have stolen election teed up for you.
Speaking of putting Trump center stage, this week, in one day, the Supreme Court fundamentally rewrote how much power a president has, particularly this president, over the federal government, killing a 91-year-old precedent that let Congress shield regulators from at-will firing. The one thing it wouldn't touch was the Federal Reserve. We'll see how long that lasts. Matt, this seems to be a pretty controversial ruling. It definitely hands Trump more power. What did you make of it?
Drudge put as a headline when this happened, King Trump put him in the crown. Look, the reality is a president should fundamentally have the right to fire people within the executive branch. The problem we're starting to have is we're losing the independence. We're losing the checks and balances. It was right that you cannot fire a member of the Fed board. We need to have that monetary independence. I look at this as overall probably a good thing, but there are a lot of concerns that came with this one for me.
To me, I see a tie to the corruption story that we talked about at the top of the show. That this week, a New York Times investigation found that Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump were financially linked to a tungsten mining project in Kazakhstan. I think Borat is involved as well. And Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick's sons are also involved. It's hundreds of millions of dollars enriching Trump and his family, involving the power of our federal government. Are there watchdogs? If there were, Trump under this ruling could fire them. This is not only part of the overall slide toward the imperial presidency that we've seen, but it's a further unleashing of total immunity and impunity for Trump. Based on the Supreme Court's prior immunity ruling, he can perform any criminal act that he wants. He can enrich himself. He can be corrupt. He can engage in graft. He can engage in quid pro quo deals like he was first impeached for. And so this is essentially blessing a slide toward monarchy. I'm not saying that everything is perfect on the Democrat side, okay? We've been infiltrated by frickin' communists, all right? So we've got a little bit of a communist problem. You have a gigantic monarchist problem.
I say this to my side all the time. You may like this with Trump, but there's a real chance there's going to be a Democrat president coming next. And when that Democrat comes in and they now have this power, it should scare you.
That was a true conservative's answer. Do you feel lonely?
I do feel lonely sometimes here. Yes.
Yeah.
All right. While we're on the Supreme Court, another big case that had to deal with trans sports athletes. Essentially what it said is men should not play in women's sports. But what I found interesting about watching this as it was being reported in real time, watching on Fox News, is the complete meltdown they were having at what should have been seen as nothing but a win. And the reason why is they did not do a universal ban across all 50 states. Matt, I got to ask, is this just a culture war issue, or does it feel like Fox News didn't really care about men and women's sports?
Oh, they completely gave the game away. It was just like on abortion when Trump himself and pro-life activists for years said, oh, we just want the states to be able to decide this. Roe v. Wade was decided wrongly because it federalized the whole issue. Let the states work this out. for themselves. As soon as the Dobbs decision came through, it was all like, actually, we do want a national abortion ban. And it's the same thing here. This entire debate, such as it is animated by wanting to make a political case out of the vanishingly small number of trans Americans who want to compete in sports in the sex category that they identify with rather than their birth sex. This is not about states' rights or fairness. There's a saying that edge cases make bad law. This is a quintessential edge case. The underlying case at issue here had a plaintiff who's a 15-year-old trans girl. She is the only known openly transgender athlete in West Virginia in any sport. And so you're talking about such a tiny sliver of Americans that this affects. Look, as a longtime youth coach for girls' teams, I understand, I really do, the sensitive issues at play here, the questions of fairness. We know from polling that 69% of Americans believe that transgender girls should only play on boys' teams consistent with their sex at birth. But this is something that should never have had a federal case made out of it. It probably shouldn't have had a legal case made out of it. I think that this is the kind of thing that local authorities, local parents can probably work out on a case-by-case basis. We don't need an edge case to create law. And what Fox News is giving away is they don't really care about this. They don't really care about fairness. They just want to weaponize the issue to target trans people because they know it's a hot button that triggers American voters and gets them on Republicans' side.
Yeah, it's a clearest example of the bias in media. And yes, I'm talking about Fox too, where we are going to try to drive a message to get viewers. Now, I actually think this was a brilliantly decided case. I don't think men should be able to play in women's sports. But what I think was absolutely key here is it gave that right back to the states. As a conservative rule of law, following the Constitution, that this is the way this case should have been decided. It is not up to the Supreme Court to write the law and change it so that it becomes a national ban. They decided this and said it's up to the states, and every conservative should be happy about that because it's the way the court should act.
Speaking of the Supreme Court, let's close out the rundown with a look at the biggest case of the week. The Supreme Court struck down Trump's executive order ending birthright citizenship, a win for the 150-year-old plain English reading of the 14th Amendment that any kindergartner should have been able to do. If you peel back the vote a little bit, what looked at first, and it certainly looked this way to me, like a clean 6-3 defeat for Trump, was actually only a single Supreme Court justice away from upending the basic plain English reading of the Constitution and one of the most basic guarantees in American law. What was most troubling about this, Matt, to me, was Clarence Thomas's 91-page dissent, in which he essentially said, this ruling will not stand for long. And when we get another bite at the apple, if we get one more conservative Supreme Court justice, we're going to overturn this. How much does that alarm you? How much should it alarm me?
I fundamentally like Clarence Thomas, but he's completely off base on this. The words are pretty crystal clear on this. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. I hear this other argument about birth tourism, but we can't pretend that the Constitution is just optional, that there's just a loophole for us to try to find a way from. The words are clear. I also saw people like Jonathan Turley, constitutional scholars, talk about we've never had this real debate, and that if you do want to change it, you have to amend the Constitution. Now, I don't think that will ever happen, but I do think that if people want to see that changed, that is the only way it will happen. And so when I read Thomas and I read Kavanaugh and I see what they're writing on the birthright citizenship, it's just a farce. Legally speaking, this is the words that are in the Constitution.
Clarence Thomas is one of the nihilists from The Big Lebowski. We believe in nothing. He doesn't believe in strict constructionism or plain English readings. He believes in achieving whatever result he wants. That's what he's saying in this dissent is, I'm going to get my way eventually. Just you watch. And yeah, that should leave the rest of us concerned. But let's move on to the battle for the midterms and take a close look at where things stand in this week's edition of The Battlefield.
The polls are shifting. The map is changing. The fight for Congress is on. This is the battlefield.
Matt, I think this is the first edition where it's really not clear when you look at all the indicators going on from the past week, where things stand, which side actually achieved an upper hand over the course of the last week. We're going to get into it. Why don't you take us through the things that you were looking at from the past week?
Yeah, let me tell you the first thing that really stuck out. This week, the New York Times and Siena College released a poll in 6 key Senate races. And it shows Democrats winning in North Carolina and Maine, which we've talked about a lot on this show. But what jumped off the page for me is that Republicans are only up 2 points in Alaska, 2 points in Iowa, 3 points in Ohio, and tied in Texas. Those are states Republicans should be leading comfortably. This is a flashing warning light that we need to pay attention to.
Now, in writing up those results, the lead New York Times pollster Nate Cohn said that at the end of the day, Republicans' home field advantage still gives them the edge to hold on to control of the Senate. Is that how you see it at the end of the day?
No, you got to dig a little deeper in these numbers. The generic ballot in each of those states was far higher for the Republicans than what the actual candidate numbers were. And not to get too wonky in here, these are also weighted numbers. Some of the raw numbers in those states were actually Democrat plus 1 or 2. So you had to weight them to get into the Republican side of this. Not to get too technical here, this is what we do in polling all the time. It's just basically a statistical analysis based on what we think the turnout and the demographics are going to look at. And we're trying to match what the results are to what we think turnout's going to be. It should not be this close. It's early June. It does not decide elections. But if we don't pay attention there, we are going to lose those seats and we're going to lose the Senate.
So you're saying it may be tied in this poll right now, but that says that down the line, it should be Democrats pulling into the lead in those states.
Yeah, the check engine light is on in the car. And if we don't fix it, the car's just going to stop working.
All right. What's your second one?
Second one, I like to look sometimes at these individual districts because I think some of them can give us a lot of information. New Jersey 7, Thomas Keene's district. Now, Cook has this race as a toss-up. Trump won it by 2 points. Democrat Mikey Sherrill won it earlier this year with 2 points. Keene missed over 100 roll call votes. He had been MIA for months, and he just disclosed this week that he was hospitalized with depression. Now, this is the type of district that Democrats need to win, and polling in early June by a Democrat firm showed that the Democrat was winning this race right now. What I'm paying attention to is, did 4 months off on the campaign trail fundamentally weaken this incumbent in one of the most competitive House districts in America?
I think we both feel a tremendous amount of sympathy for Representative Kaine in this situation. I would contrast a little bit with the primary result that happened in Colorado's 8th district this week, where the far more progressive Manny Rutinil won in a primary. And the evidence shows that when you're in a swing district like that, a far more progressive candidate will do about 1 to 2 percentage points worse than a more moderate Democrat in that same district. Does that kind of become a wash for you with what you're seeing in New Jersey?
No, the path to our victory, to Republicans holding on the House, is so narrow. It's like trying to drive a semi truck through the head of a pin needle. I don't think it's a wash.
All right. What's your third?
This is by far the biggest story of the week. The Supreme Court changed campaign strategy overnight. It is not getting enough attention. And in case you don't know what I'm talking about, the Supreme Court struck down limits on coordination between parties and candidates. Now, what most people don't know, it's going to lower the rates they get on television ads. This isn't just a legal ruling. It changed the rules of campaign itself. I still think this is the biggest deal of everything. It realigns the battlefield. It shuffles the deck. But let's park that for a minute, Matt, and take a look at how this impacts the dashboard.
All right, let's take a look at that dashboard. And first, we'll take a look at some of the structural indicators from the week. And as you can see here, Donald Trump's net approval rating actually improved by about 2 points, although that's mostly a statistical anomaly. I don't think it's really worth paying close attention to. Consumer sentiment was even. Trump's net approval among independents, which is a proxy for swing voters a little bit, it's as good a proxy as we can get. That actually got worse for Trump over the past week. The generic ballot has also recovered to its baseline. Taking a look at the probabilities of chamber outcomes, you can see that there hasn't been any shift in the prospects for a House takeover by the Democrats. But there was a very important move this week, the Alaska Senate race, moving from leans Republican to toss-up category. No major change in the governor's races, and the prediction markets ticked up generally toward the Democrats. And finally, let's get to our weekly verdict and bottom line. I graded this as a week that moved toward the Republicans. Yes, everything I just said in the structural indicators and race outcomes would seem to suggest movement toward the Democrats. But I agree with you, that overarching story of what happened to the money race swamps any outcome that you could see on a race by race basis. This is putting far more ammunition into Republicans' hands down the stretch. So for me, this was a week that was slightly tilting toward the Republicans.
All right. So from a Democrat standpoint, you see this Supreme Court race as really changing the game a little bit.
I absolutely do. And look, just to put this into context, I'll tell you a very quick story. When I was a campaign manager for the most endangered Democratic House member in the country in 2012, we were losing. We were getting absolutely pummeled. On TV, we were being outspent by 8-1. It was an absolute crush. But I was able to take advantage of a little known rule that allowed our campaign to work with the committee, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, and get committee dollars for our ads, but to run them at candidate rates. That's the issue you were just talking about. Again, I don't want to confuse people. This is what the Supreme Court just said, is these committees that used to pay 3 to 10 times more can now pay the same rates that candidates pay. And using that rule, even though we were getting so massively outspent and we were behind in the polls, we were able to put up just as many ads as our Republican opponents, and we eked out that race and won. That is what the Supreme Court decision just did, is it let everyone use that little trick that I used back in 2012, and that erases Democrats' massive advantage. I have, for years, given people the advice, if you're going to make a donation and you're a Democrat, you want your donation to really have an impact, give to a candidate. Don't give to a committee. Don't give to an advocacy organization. That advantage is gone. As of right now, Republicans have a $125 million advantage. They have $125 million more on the committee side than Democrats. What the Supreme Court decision did this week is it magnified the impact of that money advantage by as much as tenfold. It's like they literally just handed Republicans a $1 billion hammer. That's why I think this ruling has such an impact.
You're exactly right, because right now Republicans take that money advantage, and in those tight races like we're talking about, the ones that we keep looking at, gives them definitely a leg up. Do you see this as a problem in November, or is this just a headline this week?
I think it matters in November. I think short term, this is a loss for Democrats, because it's not just that the Supreme Court just magically, it's like something in Harry Potter. It's like it multiplied the money that Republicans have sitting in their bank accounts. That wouldn't matter so much if Republicans had nothing effective to say with all that money. But this week, Democrats ended up handing them more proof points around the theme that we discussed earlier, that Democrats are just a bunch of scary, scary socialists because we have nominated these DSA members. Some of them are indeed pretty tough to defend. This Daria Liza Avila Chevalier, who won in New York, is someone who has some pretty extreme views. She attended a party to celebrate the October 7th attacks. She has advocated state ownership of major industries and multiple times praised the Communist Party. All of that will appear in national ads. And there's a track record of this kind of a theme being pretty successful for Republicans. So now Republicans have a message and they have the money to run with it. Short term, it's a clear win. Longer term, what do you make of it? Is this necessarily a bad thing for Republicans, Democrats, or the system?
Look, I think this is actually a great ruling. For somebody who's been working in politics for almost 30 years, campaign finance is the thing that changed when McCain-Feingold and all those issues and ultimately sprung into super PACs. It just created these other cottage industries, but destroyed the strength of parties. I think the single biggest winner of this long-term are going to be a revitalized party. And I think that's good for America. I think a revitalized Republican, revitalized Democratic Party that can compete and get money changes a lot about how we're going to nominate, who we're going to nominate, and the issues. There's much better disclosures in the candidate and in the state parties and the national parties than there are super PACs, outside spending groups. I don't have to disclose donors. I can just run ads that look a lot like campaigns and you don't know who pays for it. With parties and committees, you do. I think it fundamentally changes the board for the better.
I agree with that last point. Even though this is a short-term loss for the Democratic Party, it does nudge things in the direction of the national parties having more access to the dollars that are currently going to super PACs. Money going to shadowy super PACs is bad. It doesn't sound like it's a good thing for more money to end up in the hands of the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, but it is, in the sense that the parties may be better able to screen out the more extreme candidates like Ms. Chevalier or Mr. Trump. And as you said, a lot more transparency with the money. We know where it's coming from. That is probably, in the long term, a good thing. And speaking of things that are good things, let's get to this week's Dose of Hope.
Maybe the best news coming out of Washington this week is that Congress left town. After days of fighting over voting bills, defense bills, procedural tricks, and the usual Capitol Hill nonsense, the House packed up early for the 4th of July recess. And honestly, maybe that's the most productive thing Congress has done all year. Because for the next couple of weeks, they cannot break anything. So maybe we should take that as a hint. Maybe this week we should take a break from politics, the outrage machine. Go outside, watch fireworks, eat something grilled, argue about whether a hot dog is a sandwich. Or I don't know, stalk out Madison Square Garden, try to catch a glimpse of Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce's wedding on July 3rd. But if you didn't make the guest list, I'm going to recommend a movie for you. Opening on July 3rd is a movie called Young Washington. I saw it when it premiered a few weeks ago, and it is excellent. And let me tell you this. America needs more movies like this. It's a film that celebrates American exceptionalism. No apologies for American greatness, no lectures, no wokeness, just the story of America's first great superhero, George Washington. Washington before the marble statues, before the face on the dollar bill, before he was the father of the country, because he was young, he was ambitious, he made mistakes, he had to learn courage before history asked him to lead. So between the fireworks, the cookouts, the wedding circus at MSG, maybe it's worth remembering that America did not begin as a sure thing. It began with people who had no idea if this thing was going to work. They just believed it was worth trying. And that's what you'll see in the movie Young Washington.
If you liked last week's Dose of Hope on 3 stunning medical breakthroughs, a team at the University of Minnesota would like to say, hold my beer. The University of Minnesota synthetic biologist Kate Adamala and her team built a cell entirely from non-living chemical components. It's made of just around 200 types of molecules and 36 genes, and this synthetic cell can feed, grow, divide, and get this, evolve. By the way, it's called a SpudCell. Adamala didn't want it named after herself, and it's partly a play on Sputnik, the satellite that opened the space age. It's partly because it looks like a potato. So, why get excited about a tater-looking Franken cell? Because these synthetic cells are a platform that scientists believe can have all kinds of amazing applications built onto them. Drug delivery systems and new approaches to cancer therapy as target applications. Synthetic cells engineered to detect disease markers and deliver treatment directly where needed. By the way, this is something that's already underway. How about synthetic cells engineered specifically to pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere? No more global warming and fewer political fights. How about manufacturing without petrochemicals? This is what Adamala called the holy grail of the field, engineered cells that manufacture plastics, fuel, and other materials without relying on petrochemical processes or toxic byproducts. And finally, what about the things we don't even know yet? Synthetic cells are a way of understanding disease and basic biology itself. And when we learn exactly how all the pieces work, we literally can't say what cures we'll be able to invent. Now, I know that for some people, there's a queasy feeling to this. I joked about a Franken-cell a moment ago, but some people worried that we're creating life or something close to it, which poses the question, is this playing God? That's a fair concern, but it's worth pointing out that scientists do not believe that these cells are alive. They're tools that make use of biology, and ethicists point out that the same concern has been leveled at nearly every major medical and biological advance in history: anesthesia, the birth control pill, organ transplants, even defibrillation. The most important thing, though, is that the scientists involved are taking the concern seriously. They've not patented this technology. They're not trying to become profitable. They've founded a public benefit nonprofit to distribute the technology to other researchers and coordinate the field so that safety and governance can happen now on the basis of scientists working in the open. And with that kind of careful scrutiny and open discussion, we can focus on the possibilities. One scientist compared this breakthrough to the Wright flyer, the first powered flight that lasted 12 seconds. 60 years later, we were on the moon. And that's the kind of journey we just embarked on this week. And on that note, for Matt, I'm Matt. We'll see you next time.